Alright, we're going to start out this video in a little place called Pahrump, Nevada, and that is in North America, not far from Las Vegas, Sin City. So yeah, here it is, and we notice right away that the streets are very unusual. We see a lot of things like this that seem a little bit out of place. And this town is amazingly paved, not paved, but laid out for a town that is not very populated. And I think it would take an amazing amount of resources to lay out a town this way long before you ever have people to fill it. It would be a feat in engineering, and it's not appreciated because I don't think they want people to appreciate it. This is much older. All of this is much older than we're led to believe. And I can prove it. Let's go up here and look at this neighborhood, for example. We have to look at the areas that are far away from people because once it becomes developed, it's hard to recognize the older stuff. But this is older stuff. This is what all of Pahrump used to look like. And this almost has a Celtic weave. I mean, it's very intricate. To me, it's beautiful art, but yet I don't think it was art. But I definitely think it's ancient, just like this. This almost looks like circuitry, some kind of circuitry, but nevertheless something very old, something very, very old. Now see how this area looks. Now let's look back in 1994 and you can see what it really looked like. But as time passes, things look different. So now let's go to a place called California City in California. And this is a very similar city, the way that it's completely laid out, and you can tell from the outskirts. And it's hard to tell from the inside, although you do see these unusual neighborhoods again and what looks like circuitry more so than neighborhoods. But if we go up here, we can really see what we were seeing in Pahrump. Not one single house. And always airports. And let's go a little further and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now here, this is the middle of absolutely nowhere, and this proves that this is much older. You see, we have the same circuitry, and this has been here forever. Let's go back and see if anything looked much different in 1994. Again, unchanged. This is ancient. This is definitely old. Let's zoom in a little more here. And let's go back to a modern date. So yeah, this is definitely old. Even this line right here is old. You see how perfect it is. And these lines will cut through ravines and water and mountains, and they don't waver. They do not waver because they're part of something much greater. They're connected to all of these, and we don't know what it is. Now in Pahrump, where we were earlier in Nevada, they have the audacity to name every single little cul-de-sac and street as if it's their own. But isn't that how it is, you know? The victors always come in and claim everything as their own, as if they built it. We also see these circles all over the place, like you need so many racetracks out here in the middle of the desert. Of course we turn them into racetracks, And there's another one that you could see right over here. We do. And we make airports and racetracks out of them, but these are much older, and they served another purpose at one point, along with all of these lines. Now I'll take you to another place. Oh, actually, that's where we just were. We're going to go to the Edwards Air Force Base. Edwards Air Force Base, not far from where they make that borax cleaning here in Boron, and one of these mines here is where they get that borax cleaning soap that some say is actually really good for you internally. I can't verify that. But Edwards Air Force Base, covered in these lines, and they've actually turned them into, I think they do a good job at disguising these. See, they've turned this whole weird anomalous pattern that we see here, they've tried to make some sense out of it and paved and put buildings, but it's still the same circuit-like grid, including their little city here that they tried to make us believe they designed and laid out this way, but it's that same circuitry. It just looks a lot more legit once it has buildings on it, but if you go up here where they haven't built buildings, where they just ran out of, need, you can see the old pattern is still underneath. So now let's jump over to a place that I call Ground Zero. And it's actually the site of a crater, but I think it's important. I think it's important to show this area and what we're dealing with, and perhaps why they call this whole area Death Valley. Now, we're told that this crater, the Sedan crater, and this is the big tourist attraction here, we're told that this is a crater, from space, but if we look carefully here, we can see a lot of older things, older ruins scattered amongst these craters. It's as if this whole place was strategically bombed. Here's a good example. And we see all the ancient lines underneath it. We see where buildings and roads and all kinds of different things were, but then we also see these craters as if this place has just been wiped out. Again, why it might be called Death Valley. Now, if there were craters here and nothing underneath it, no signs of civilization as we're seeing here, then I would say, okay, maybe it was just craters. But when we zoom out, you notice that the craters follow the civilization. Once there's less civilization out here, there's less craters. There was no need, for instance, if something did come from the sky, well, something would have hit right here. But no, there was less activity. Here we just see a lot of activity. And in fact, what we see is circular and square dwellings. And this actually is not too far from Area 51. Let's have a little look at Area 51. Just right over a few mountain ranges, we find ourselves at Area 51. And again, a mysterious airport, a lake bed that just kind of looks like a lake bed till you zoom in. And again, we see these ancient lines running through here. And just the whole thing, this was definitely part of the old grid. You can see old grid underneath it, intersecting lines, the same way that these lines run all through Nevada. And we'll jump back to this little area that I call the Destroyed City. Now, this one has less than the last one that we were looking at, but what I find interesting about this one is it kind of reminds me of what we see in New Mexico, where people would build circular dwellings. And I could be wrong. It could have a completely different purpose. But again, all of this has been seemingly wiped out. I mean, we barely see anything under here. And of course, Google could be bleaching it out, making it a little more difficult to see. But we also see these lines running through everywhere. And again, airports everywhere, in the middle of nowhere. Really, I think just cover-ups, just trying to make sense of all of these lines. But if you look carefully, they haven't remedied all of them. So just to give you an idea of what these ancient roads look like, here is an example. You know, they're never by themselves. You know, they run in 4s and 5s. So you see here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, even 5 out here. And watch these babies. I mean, these just run and they cover terrain and they go through all kinds of things. And they even change the vegetation. The vegetation even looks different where these lines. I mean, we could never do that. I mean, what kind of herbicide would it require to accomplish that, you know, to change the vegetation on the sides of these roads? Just an incredible feat of engineering. I don't even know if that's something we're capable of, altering the landscape in that regard. And now let's look at Peru. Now Peru is the first place I ever heard of that had these lines. They call them the Nazca lines. Peru is littered with these lines, and even hummingbird creatures like this. These are covered, and some of these are miles across. And so we're seeing variations of these in America. We're seeing the lines. We're not seeing so much the art, although I do believe they exist and they will surface as more and more people begin to comb their areas. But yeah, that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. Here I even found a little yin-yang symbol. And the image is really poor, but you can see all of these lines. And here again, maybe something older underneath that we just can't see anymore. But this is giant. I mean, the scale of what was going on here, we can't even comprehend. We can only speculate. But it's interesting to think that we have them right in our backyards here in North America as well, and it's worth looking into. I look forward to doing some explorations here in Nevada, and you know, just seeing maybe what it is that we're looking at here. So, in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe gives you a little idea of what's underneath. This was one of my favorites. I'll just end with this one. This reminded me of what we see in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. Really, really interesting here. And I'd love to get my feet on this area and see what kind of ruins are left in here. But nevertheless, Death Valley. Death Valley. Is there another reason they call it Death Valley? I always thought it had to do with the heat, but I think there's more to it. In any case, thanks for watching. Have a blessed day.